Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and welcome those who are coming to us via our live stream. And as I've told those in attendance here in the sanctuary, we are looking at Luke's Gospel, chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. And before we read the passage, and I'll probably break it up into two separate, I'll read 11 through 14 and then read 15 through 19. Before we read that, just some introductory things. It is commonly known as, or thought of as a part of a greater passage on Jesus' teaching. We'll discuss in a moment actually, that Jesus was making his way to Jerusalem, and that is both a physical, geographical statement, and it is also a theological statement. Luke gives us earlier in his gospel that Jesus set his face towards Jerusalem, and again, geographically and theologically, because what Jesus is doing is he's teaching on his passion. He's teaching on going to the cross. And so as we read in just a moment that he is on his way to Jerusalem, that has multiple meanings. He is physically on his way to Jerusalem, but he's also on his way to Jerusalem to experience the things that God, his Father, has had planned. Most know that have been here any length of time that Palm Sunday is also known as Passion Sunday. Holy Week is also known as Passion Week, and for that very reason, as Jesus, experiences the procession of the palms, the hosannas, and all those things in celebration, he then makes his way towards his passion for his people. So it begins with that, on Jesus' way to Jerusalem. It's also, as we read that, and as we will see in just a few moments, we need to discuss some assumptions, and we can do that. You can offer to me what you know, some assumptions about Jews and Samaritans. So, go. What do we know about Jews and Samaritans? They don't like each other. Okay? They don't like each other. All right? What else? Why don't they like each other?
Because the Jews thought they were better than the Samaritans.
Okay, yep. And why did they think such? The Samaritans had done what? What made them Samaritans, other than they're from Samaria?
Well,
They weren't Jewish. They weren't God's chosen people, right?
They didn't follow the rules.
Right?
Are you people asleep?
They intermarried, which I think, that was, they intermarried. Donna, was that what, I think that's, what you were getting ready to say. And we can remember all the way back to the ites, the Canaanites and the Hittites and all the ites. And when they were getting ready to go into the promised land, one of the things that God's chosen people were told not to do was what? Intermarry. Okay. So, they indeed were, intermarried. They were indeed had done that. So they did not associate, and they, being the Jews, did not associate with the Samaritans. What else? This made Samaritans second-class citizens. Okay. All right. But there's some interesting things, I think, that we can draw out of this passage. Okay. As Jesus makes his way, and again, we're going to read this in a minute, we're told that he is, in making his way, he is traveling along the border between Samaria and Galilee. I'm going to ask a really hard question. What do we call the people from Samaria? Some of you laughed. Others of you looked at me like I was asking a trick question, and I wasn't. All right? And the people from Galilee. Galileans. So they would be of the Jewish population. The Samaritans would not. So again, I think as we read that, we're not just to hear that Jesus was, we're not just to hear physical location. We're to hear theological and other issues. We're to hear that as Jesus makes his way, this confrontation is to be expected because he's going to come across both Samaritans and Jews. Okay? So as he does so, what we can find out, and again, we're going to read 11 through 14 in a minute, but what we can find out is all of a sudden, Samaritans and Jews are getting along and cohabitating. Why are they doing that? Let's read 11 through 14. All right? So, verse 11, chapter 17 in Luke's Gospel. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, remember we've said both physical and theological that's a statement. Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. Again, that has multiple meanings. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priest." And as they went, they were cleansed. Okay? So I think a fair assumption can be, as we're told that Jesus is making his way through on the border of Samaria and Galilee, a fair assumption is there are Israelites, there are Jews, as well as we know of at least one Samaritan that lives where? In a leper colony. And what's, again, another thing that I think we can learn from this is their unfortunate, hear that, their unfortunate common bond has them lay down what other Jews would never do with a Samaritan, and that is be in close proximity and live with them. Okay? So, isn't that interesting? So I want to go off on that tangent just a little bit, okay? Isn't that interesting that when people can find, even in, maybe I shouldn't say even, but in negative situations, in situations that you don't want to even be in, but when people find that they have a common bond, a lot of the stuff that separates them goes away, right? And I've given to you in your notes that wouldn't that be nice that perhaps if we all realized a common bond we have, and that is the need for Jesus Christ, the need for God, that a lot of the stuff that we cause, again, I'm drawing out of the Scripture. So this is, as I often say, reading between the lines. But isn't it interesting that I think that if we could all realize our desperate need for Christ, our desperate need for God, and that we all have that in common, that a lot of the stuff that we allow to infiltrate and cause us not to want to be with, or not to want to associate with, or not to want to, all the not to want tos that we can add to it, go by the wayside. And I would offer to us that as we continue in reading this, but as we leave this place, we think of that we have so much more, for the most part, not with everybody, I hear that, but for the most part, we have so much more in common with people than sometimes we think. Okay, so Jesus tells, well, let's go back through here. So we've looked at, so Jesus says, "Go show yourselves to the priests." Why did he do that? Okay, to cleanse, the priest could cleanse, correct. Let's go back to, I've given you a scriptural reference, Luke 5, verses 12 through 16. While Jesus was in, verse 12, while Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. And here's where we are, verse 14. Then Jesus ordered him, "Don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." It was the priest who could do what? Keep going.
Declare them to the public that they were clean.
Declare them to be clean. In fact, it was the priest who had to declare them that they were clean, that they were cleansed, okay? So Jesus tells the 10, we're back in Luke 17, Jesus tells the 10 to do that. I have some questions. I've given them to you in your outline. The first question, why would Jesus send a Samaritan to the priest? I'm not saying we're going to answer these questions. We will eventually, but right now, but in a minute, but not right this moment. Say it again. But he's a Samaritan. Jesus didn't care? Well, I think Jesus cared.
Did Jesus know?
Oh, I think Jesus knew that one was a Samaritan. Yeah.
Different clothes or what?
Okay, all right. So okay. Well, I agree with that. Absolutely. Yes. Go ahead. Remember what's happening. Remember that we started with on his way to Jerusalem. And what did we say? This is both a geographical statement and a theological, whatever you want to call it, a God statement, right? So Jesus is continuing to teach, and what he's letting people know is what Donna has just said. What'd you say again? Don't look at me and say I can't remember. Please don't do that. Right. Exactly. So here is a healing that's letting us know that Jesus, for lack of better, that's coming to mind anyway, Jesus is putting his money where his mouth is. That Jesus is indeed in his teachings as he goes towards his passion, which his passion is us, guys. His passion is what he did on the cross. As he goes towards his passion, that he has come for everyone. Okay? So perhaps we did answer that question. Well, I want to know why Jesus talked the way he did about the other 9 when they absolutely, positively did what they were told to do. Didn't they? What did Jesus tell them to do? He said, when he saw to them, go to the priest and show yourself. So let's continue on so we'll know that. 15 through 19, and then we'll just pick it all up. All right. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. So I think perhaps other translations do too, but I think we can say, came back shouting praises to God. Okay, I think that's fair. All right. Okay, so in a loud voice, he threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Good. Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, rise and go, your faith has made you well. Okay, so my question is, another question is, why talk so? He says, we're not all of 10. So here, let me own. I read that to mean he's not pleased with the other 9. Do you read the same thing or no? Okay, so I read that to mean he's not pleased with the other 9. But my question is, and maybe I'm being nitpicky, which would not be the first time, but my question is, they did exactly what he told them to do, right? Okay? And then all of a sudden he's saying, where's the other 9? Only the foreigner? Only the one, you'll see in a moment, that's got 2 strikes against him already? In society's eyes. Nobody came back but this one. Why speak of the 9 in the way that he did? Okay. So, in my readings for tonight, there were some, not a lot, but there were some who indicated they felt like that on their way to the priest, this one realized who it was that had healed him and immediately turned around and came back shouting praises to God.
And I think the other 9 thought the priest was going to be the star.
Remember who the other 9 probably are, right?
Yep.
Okay. Their heritage, ethnicity. Okay. So you thought what? That the other 9 thought that,
He told them to go see the priest real quick and see
yeah,
the priest would get the glory instead of Jesus.
yeah, okay, yeah. That the priest would. Why would they think that? Why would think of who they are?
And think of what they thought of Jesus.
Okay, there we go. Some did. We don't know if these particular 9 did, but absolutely. The priest was who they were supposed to go to, right? The priest was who we've just said, who was to declare them cleansed. Okay? We're making, I think, a fair assumption that these 9 are not Samaritans. Okay? They're of the Galilean ilk. Okay? But so we I think that's fair anyway, because Jesus makes it a point to say it was only the foreigner. The one that came back was the foreigner. Okay, the others would not have been. So remember that they're still giving who credit for them being healed. They're not giving Jesus credit, are they? Or if they are, they're thankless. Well, I guess, yeah, I think that's fair, but they're still feeling like, and you may think I'm reading way too much into this, but they're still feeling like they have to go through who? The priest. Okay? And Jesus is teaching on his passion as he makes his way to Jerusalem. Okay? And part of Jesus' teaching and what he does on the cross is what? What happened on the cross? Jesus died. What else happened the day Jesus died that would indicate no more need for the priests? Say it again. Yeah, the veil ripped, okay? So Jesus is continuing to teach, and the foreigner, comes back. So, and this leads me to my last question. Your faith has made you well. Weren't they all healed? I mean, we're reading on the surface. We're reading this as he comes back. He tells him, your faith has made you well. Right? Well, I think their obedience, I mean, it says, doesn't it? Let me make sure. And what's the chances the foreigner was rebuked by the priest? Yeah, I don't, yeah, that's actually, Ed, that's an actually very good point. Not that Ed doesn't make good points. Don't pick up on that. That's not what I meant. Truly not what I meant. No. I mean, let me rephrase what was going through my mind. That hadn't even crossed my mind, which it should have. That's what crossed my mind. Because the one that came back was a Samaritan. So the priest would have nothing to do with him. Right? Is that fair? I think that's fair. So maybe, gosh, this is even deeper, right? So maybe what the Samaritan realized is that the only way he could be cleansed, the only way he could be saved was how? Through Jesus Christ. Go ahead.
Ain't that the way a lot of us is?
That's the way all of us should be. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Ain't that the way some of us is? We get healed, but we don't go back to the Savior. We go get credit to the doctor or whoever, but not Jesus.
Right.
Ain't that not realize it?
Which is exactly where we're heading. So very nice. Exactly. Do we give credit where credit's due? And that perhaps is another point Jesus is trying to make. That's exactly right. But I think that some of us, I don't want to say a lot, but there are people who when healing takes place, we're talking about physical healing right now. Jesus is talking about another type of healing as he's talking to the Samaritan in verse 19. But physical healing, I think we very much, in fact, I think some look everywhere they can but God to give credit. Does that make sense? Okay. Nope, the doctor healed me. Nope. And God works through them. I mean, we just, if we didn't believe that, we've got a prayer list. Okay. So yeah, but I think that, man, I really like that. I may change my sermon for Sunday, but I'm just teasing. But that he perhaps made his way to the priest, and the priest had to reject him. because he's a Samaritan. And as he came back, the only way he was healed, the only way he could make sense of him being healed was through what Christ had done what Jesus had done for him. No, I don't know where it. This is too good, Donna. Come on. Go ahead. That's fine. Say it again. I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, to the high priest. Yeah. Right. And perhaps especially because he was a Samaritan. Absolutely. And you know what I find interesting, too, is if we go back up into the first part of that, they all believed Jesus had some sort of power, right? I mean, they're standing on the, I was going to say roadside, but I don't know where they are. They stood at a distance. Some I've read say there was no set distance. I've heard others say it was up to 50 yards. That's a pretty good, you got to shout, right? If someone's 50 yards from you, you got to really make yourself heard. But all, at some point, believed that Jesus, and this goes back, tell me your name again. Peggy. How do I not remember Peggy? No, all I did was ask your name, Peggy. No, I'm just teasing. Go ahead. I'm just teasing. Absolutely, yeah. They had to make a declaration they weren't clean. So, and that's another thing that we're going into with the Samaritan is the things that they had to overcome, that he had to overcome to even get to the point of screaming out, Master, heal us, Master, have pity on us, is what's said, right? Yeah. So that's what I was saying, that they had to keep, by some estimates, up to 50 yards. Maybe there's other estimates. We can. But they had to keep a great distance, so they didn't make others unclean. Okay? Yeah, absolutely. Other thoughts? Sorry. Please. Great. Right. Okay. Cleanse them, absolutely. And that's where we're heading with good, very good. That's where we're heading with what Jesus says towards the end. When he looks at the leper and says, rise and go, your faith has made you well. Because the verbiage used, made you well, also can mean to be saved. Okay. In fact, I've given you a reference over to 19, a very well-known passage of scripture for most of us, if not all of us, and that is when Jesus comes upon Zacchaeus, right? So all that happens with Zacchaeus. We all know he was a wee little man, but Jesus comes upon Zacchaeus, right? Okay, and after Zacchaeus presents himself and sees that Jesus is the one that it can bring to him salvation, Jesus says these words, verse 9. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save, the lost. Okay. So the same verbiage, the same words that are used for have made you well, I believe that's the way this translates it, yes, have made you well in 17 verse 19 is the same as what we have in Zacchaeus when he says, salvation has come to your house, and I am come to those to be saved. Okay. All right. I've given you some other things to think about with this. One is the comparison between this and what we see in 2 Kings with Naaman. You remember the prophet Naaman, right? You remember, not prophet, prophet was Elisha. You remember Naaman. Naaman had leprosy, right? And he goes, and at first he's not happy. You remember why he's not happy? Why is he not happy? He makes his way, and Elisha does not come out to him, right? What happens? He sends a representative out. Naaman thinks he's of such a high place in the army and such a high place in society that the prophet should come out himself. And what he is told is go wash in this pool, which wasn't the pool that he thought he should wash in. There were much better pools to wash in, he thinks. So he gets upset that he's not told to do enough to get better, right? But what eventually happens is Naaman is cleansed from his leprosy, and he becomes one of God's people, right? Okay, so we're to hear that similar happening with what's taking place with this Samaritan. And, Donna hit a nail on the head, and so many others have said so many good things, is that one of the things Jesus is making clear, I believe, with this is, and hear how shocking it would be and how heretical it would be, right? One of the things Jesus is letting them know is, I didn't come for just you people. I came for everybody. And guys, we've said this before, and that is, think of how the Jews, they have known, these have especially, the stories of Abraham, they have known since birth that they are what? God's chosen people. They have known we are God's chosen people. And here comes one that says, I came for you, but guess what? I also came for them. And I don't like us versus them verbiage. But I also came for them, right? And how heretical that was for any Jew to hear. Okay. So, anyway, one of the things I want us to see too tonight is how difficult this could have been, or I think was, for the Samaritan leper to, they were told to keep to themselves. I told you he had already had 2 strikes against him, right? Okay, he was Samaritan, right? Which meant that the Jews didn't like him. That meant that his people had intermarried, intermingled, whatever you want to call it. He also was heretical as far as faith was concerned. But then the second strike, Samaritan, the second strike is he's a leper, okay? And he has to have he feels, let me say it this way, he feels so drawn, like the other 9 during the beginning, but he feels so drawn to Jesus that he lays aside all of what society thinks about him, and he does what? What does he end up doing? He absolutely lays himself at the feet of Jesus and praises and shouts and worships and anything else you want to say with it. Scripture says he came very loudly back and threw himself at his feet, bowed at his feet. Okay. He did not care what society thought of him. What he knew was this one, as Greg has offered in the way he did, and I appreciate and like that, he knew the one who had truly cleansed him. Right? And guys, how many of us, and we're going to get to some other things as well, but how many of us, my goodness, I'll point fingers here, but how many of us let society dictate our praise and our worship? How many of us, and I don't just mean in here, I mean out there. How many of us, when God does something, and maybe we do this, but how many of us, when we feel God has cleansed us, when we feel God has saved us, when we feel God has healed us from something, or God has done something miraculous for that day, your cholesterol levels are better than mine, and I'm not real happy with God right now because I've worked real hard no, I'm just teasing. But how many of us then say, praise be to God, And maybe we're someone and someone says, anything interesting happened to you? Yeah, let me tell you what God did for me today, right? And those type of things. How many of us find ourselves in that way and we don't do what this Samaritan leper did, and that's make our way back and give praise where praise is due? Comments thus far on what we've talked about. Please, Greg. Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Yeah, and I think that's part of Jesus' problem with the 9. Yeah, what was just said is ingratitude is one of the worst sins biblically. You know, not being grateful, not being thankful. And I think that's Jesus' point with the other 9 is, and how many of us don't do that? And I didn't put it in your notes, another thing I was reading concerning some of this, concerning tonight was, how often are we not grateful for the small things? And one of the first things they said was, what about your parents, right? Your parents took you from, you were totally 100% dependent on your parents when you were first born. Most of you were. I came out independent, but y'all had some issues. I'm just teasing. But all of us were totally 100%. And then as we get older, we kind of get away from that and we forget, And then that cycle of life happens, and what happens? Who becomes dependent on us? Sometimes. Our parents. And what do?
Take them in.
We do take them in. But some of us do so begrudgingly. I'm not looking at you because you did it begrudgingly. Truly, I'm not. But don't we? Or when the going, listen, fingers pointing here, when the going gets tough, we're like, ugh, and totally forget that this is the person, talk about ingratitude, that this is the person that absolutely carried us around, that changed what, that fed us when we couldn't feed ourselves. Well, who gave us life to begin with? We wouldn't even be here. And you've heard me say this before. How many tonight have thought about breathing right now? Anybody? Now we are. Breathe in, breathe out. Yeah, I haven't, right? That's something we take for granted. But who is it that put that in us to where we actually do that involuntarily, right? So many things like that. Okay. I forget the other things that they mentioned. That was one of them as far as ingratitude. Okay. Please say it.
As many times as I've done this story, not that I'm old, but as many times as I've done this story, I've never thought about number 7 on page 2. We have a story of 10 being healed and 1
being saved. Absolutely.
I've never put that in there.
Yeah.
I know you find that shocking.
No, I don't. Yes, I do. Totally shocking. No, absolutely. Well, I've already admitted, man, Ed's giving me something to chew on. Honestly, that's as far as him being rejected by the priest. But yes, 10 being physically healed, or that the leprosy was gone, but 1 was saved. And guys, what we need to hear is the 1%, the 10%. 10, 1, that's 10%, not 1%. It'd be 100, right? Okay, so the 10% that were saved was not the 10% that if you had looked at this, if a priest had looked at this, if others had looked at, that would not be the 10% that we would think would be saved, right? This is, again, 2 strikes, he's got 1 more, and he's out. I don't think they played baseball back then, but I'm going to use that analogy. Okay? So I think that we cannot miss that the one who came back, that the one who showed and shouted his praise for God, that fell at Christ's feet, at Jesus' feet, it would have absolutely positively been the one that society would think was beyond salvation, is the one who was. And the one who Jesus said those things to. All right. I guess I'll kind of go to our conclusion and say, I think another kind of underlying thing that we can take from this is I've said, they knew since birth they were the chosen people. That when that's been the case, we have expectations that lead us to then complacency. that lead us to, that's, we just expect it, right? Expectations. So we just, it's just the way it always, and then we lose that thankfulness. We lose that gratitude. We lose the things that caused this Samaritan leper to come back and truly praise God. And I gave you a little quote. I came across a quote. Fred Craddock, he died, I think 10 years ago, actually, somewhere along those lines. But he offered this up, and this isn't a totally true statement, because many in the church are grateful, many in the church, but at least it's given me something to think about. And it said, he wrote these words. He said, "It is often the stranger in the church who sings heartily the hymns or songs that we have long left to the choir. It's the stranger in the church who expresses gratitude for the blessings we had not noticed. It's the stranger in the church who listens attentively to the sermon we think we have already heard, who gets excited about our old Bible, and who becomes actively involved in acts of service to which we send a small donation." And he ends with, "Must it always be so?" Again, that's an overgeneralization. But the point I think he's trying to, or I believe he's trying to make, is that sometimes when we've been doing something for so long, sometimes when we've if we've been a Christian since age 9, that we just take these things for granted, and we forget how it feels to be that Samaritan leper. We forget how it feels to know that without God we don't have anything, and that it is indeed not the high priest, not the lowercase high priest, which they would have uppercased. But anyway, it's not the high priest, the priest that they went back to, but it is the high priest, it is Jesus the Christ, who offers us salvation. And I think that a huge thing we take away from this is that he offers it to everyone. Not a select few, not a chosen few, but to everyone. Okay. Comments or questions or something you think should have been said or concerning our passage? Okay. We're going to close in prayer, and Greg, do you mind closing us?
Lord God, we thank you, Father, for tonight that we spent time around your word. Our hearts, Father, turn to these where we started listening on the prayer list, burdens on our hearts, people that are grieving, people that are facing procedures. We pray, Father, that they'll all be ready to give thanks to you. Thank you for the many times you've rescued us in this life. I pray, Father, we never have that great gross sin of ingratitude in our hearts. Bless this pastor and the church and all that pertains to them. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.